show the slides?
Okay. Can you see my slides? I have them shared on BlueJeans.
Cannot hear me. Kevin, you cannot hear me now?
Chris, I can't see them.
You can't see my slides.
What now? Any better?
No.
Log back in.
Okay, we see slides.
Lemon, you want to dial back in? They can't hear us?
I can hear you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh, much better.
Yay!
Yeah, with feedback.
Okay, so I have you here on from my laptop instead of on the dial-in. So why don't we get going here? So welcome to the Sprint 26 demo report. Sprint just ended this Monday. Next slide, please. All right, so we'll review the statistics of the sprint. Greg will give us an overview of the providers. Dan will give us a UI overview. Greg McCullough will give us a few overviews on automated provisioning. We'll talk about tenants. Keenan will talk about tenants. Greg Tanzillo and Jason will talk about the appliance core. And Keenan will tell us about the appliance console. Next slide, please. Okay, so this sprint, we had a very healthy sprint. We had 181 pull requests merged and a pretty good mix. We had 65 bugs, 41 enhancements, 28 technical debt, 27 refactoring, 19 gem changes, and kind of the rest as you see there. So pretty healthy spread. Next slide, please. So several other things happened that Jason will dive into details later, but we were able to, because we rerouted the appliance, we were able to hook it up with Gymnasium, which gives us an overview of the gems that we use and how, whether they're outdated or not, or whether they have vulnerabilities or not. And there's still some issues with showing all the gems that we use, but currently we're showing 39 green and 23 yellow, and we're going to try to whittle down that yellow number to close to 0. Some other things is because of some code reorganization, we created 2 new repositories. The ManageIQ appliance build, which is used to build the community appliance, and ManageIQ appliance, which are the files that live on the appliance that are not really in the core repo. Okay, that's it. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll turn it over to Greg to talk about providers.
All right, so as, I'm no longer receiving a presentation. I'll wait for it to come back up. Does everybody else see the present? Oh wait, I think it's come back.
Let me stop sharing and then reshare. Something must have happened.
Okay.
Let me just try that, see if it works. How about now?
All right, looks good. Go up one slide. Perfect. All right, so, oh, bring it back. Okay, as Oleg was pointing out, Sprint 26 was full of just monumental refactoring. Before we jump into how that refactoring impacted the provider space, I want to talk about a couple of specific changes. So first, there's a fix from the OpenStack integration team. Previously, ManageIQ was only collecting instance flavors from OpenStack that were available to the admin tenant. This caused problems both in inventory collection and in provisioning. But now ManageIQ will collect all flavors from all OpenStack tenants that are available to ManageIQ. This is a really important change. I think it really strengthens ManageIQ's integration with OpenStack. So the other change is an enhancement that comes from the container integration team. So ManageIQ now has the ability to associate a Kubernetes node with OpenStack instances or with an OpenStack instance. And this is a really important step forward, I think, as we try to build a more holistic picture of this total management environment that we're shooting for. I think it's a really great addition. If you can jump to the next slide. So back to that refactoring. We're beginning to build dedicated namespace for provider code and namespaces for each provider. And we can see two advantages from this. First, it should be easier to track down where code lives for each provider. Instead of searching the code base for, let's say, like VMware throughout the entire repository, all VMware specific code should be under one directory now. The other advantage is that this opens the door to start defining this notion of provider plugins that we keep talking about. As each provider is moved to their own namespace, we're going to begin finding and extracting these common implementation patterns and help define the plugins. I have a couple examples of what's been moved so far. The first example shows how VMware's external management system was moved and namespaced. And that second example shows the same thing for Amazon. So you can see how we've taken EMS VMware from app models and created a namespace for ManageIQ providers. And then InfraManager for VMware lives under that namespace. And you can see the same thing for EMS Amazon, where now it's Cloud Manager for Amazon lives under the ManageIQ provider's namespace. These are just two examples of a lot of code that was moved during this sprint. Not just in the provider space. Jason's going to talk about rerouting the repository later. So there's a ton of code that was moved around. Matthew, the engineer who's been leading this effort, has been largely heads down knocking this out. But next sprint, I'm going to ask him to give a more in-depth view of these changes and what the kind of greater impact is. The last thing I want to add about this is that we've been talking about this for a really long time. And I just want to say I'm really super excited to see this finally start to take shape. This is a really important step in what's going to be happening next. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to talk about some UI changes.
Oh. What'd you do, Chris?
I was so close to turning it over to Dan.
Oh, I'm doing nothing. I'm not even touching anything. It seems to be stopping on its own. So let me stop and restart. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay.
You didn't expect your first time to go smoothly, did you? Okay. All right. So on the user interface side, okay, so yeah, we were pretty busy. There were 190 plus PRs merged. Almost half of those were from the UI group. And that's with a few people missing most of the sprint. So almost half of those were bugs, but also got to take into effect the changes that Greg mentioned. There were some massive changes. So a lot of these bugs were self-inflicted, so we ended up cleaning up after a lot of these major changes went in. We did make some progress on the technical debt. We're trying to replace all of the DHLMX controls, and we got started on that. So you'll start seeing some of those being totally replaced and partially replaced in the next few sprints, and hopefully over the next few months we'll get rid of them all. There's a couple remaining tree presenter and explore presenter conversions in progress. We want to try to get everything to that new object model so we can move forward. And we also switched the Patternfly less implementation to use Sass. We participated in the Patternfly project as well to get that to happen, which has the added benefit of removing a very large gem that was not very friendly to the product. So, as far as UI updates, I've got a couple sample screens coming up for the ongoing Patternfly styling, as well as the updates to the scheduler editor. So next slide. So we've just been converting over to Patternfly throughout the product. This is just a sample here, so you'll see all the tabs we got this sprint. We had various different kinds. Most of them were jQuery tabs, like you see above there, and they're all converted now to the Patternfly tabs on the bottom. Next slide. And with the schedule editor kind of being our poster child editor for all the latest stuff, we've upgraded that to use Patternfly, as well as making the display and the edit forms very consistent in styling. So you'll see on the left side, where you're looking at a schedule, and then when you hit edit, it looks very similar, but the fields open up to edit. All right, next slide. And then with the latest Angular updates and Patternfly matching, you can see here now we've got the inline errors, telling you what's either wrong or needs to be done to fields. We actually colored the pull downs, so if you need to select one, it's actually light red there. There's no real error there, but it shows that you have to choose something. And the buttons on the bottom will react to all this as well. So if there is any problems, you won't be able to save and things like that. So it's all becoming very smart on the browser. And that's it on the UI side.
All right, so in this sprint on the automate side, we got an enhancement in to allow more control of the flow through the state machine. So there are really 3 enhancements in here. The first one is useful on something like an on entry step for a state machine, where a good example is, you need to power off, you have a state to power off a VM. You can check in the on entry if that VM is already off and just skip that step completely. As well, the continue is in the state machine today. If we hit an error, the state machine will abort. And so the continue result will allow you to continue on in the state machine. You can flag that you've hit an error and deal with that in later states, or really however you feel like dealing with that error. But it gives you the ability where before we were just aborting out of the state machine. So now you have control to stay there. The last one is a little trickier. I worry about or warn people from using it too lightly, but the state, you have to name the state that you want to move to next. This support was always kind of in there, but wasn't well documented. So we did a little cleanup around it, but this state would allow you to get into something like an infinite loop if you jumped back in the state machine, or, so you need to be careful with it. But there are cases where you would want to move to maybe jump several states or something in a state machine, depending on logic. So it does have its uses, but I would caution people using that one too much. I'm not thinking of Kevin Morey directly, but just, all right. Next slide.
Kevin says this is cool.
I await your tickets. So one of the things we did, we created a worker just for the automate work. Previously, the work was handled by the priority worker. So as we're shifting some of this work, we wanted to get a unique worker for him. More stuff is going to be queued up, where today it can run synchronously. So we found a real need to have an individual worker dedicated just for that. And of course, the settings are exposed so that you can scale that worker as well and define its memory limits. I don't think there's a lot of work being pushed to that right now, but that in the next sprint or so that will change. It will get a lot more use. Next slide. Cool. And then from the provisioning side, small one, we were always collecting shared networks, but we did not have a flag to identify them as shared. So if you're provisioning to a specific tenant, you would only see the networks defined on that tenant, and you wouldn't see ones marked as shared across tenants. So we added a flag, and those are now available in the drop-down provisioning. So cool. Right now they're not. Oh, hey, look at that.
We lost the screen again.
I would say that the one thing is that looking at it yesterday, we might want to flag those as shared in the UI, so you identify them as being either direct or shared in the provisioning dropdown. So that might be a forthcoming enhancement against that one.
Yep.
Cool. All right, and I think over to tenants and Keenan.
Cool, thank you. So for the tenants, the past 2 sprints, we've mostly been nailing down the use cases. So finishing up this sprint, we've gotten the initial modeling into the database. And next sprint, we'll be working with Dan's team on specifically the super admin use cases. So creating the tenants and assigning the brand. Right now, our database does support creating tenants, assigning brands, associating the managed entities like the providers and VMs with a tenant, and also associating users. We just need to nail down the API that the UI team can use so that it's easier to move that across. So that's where we are with tenants and where we're going forward. On to, I can't remember who's next. Would be Greg. Thanks.
Thanks, Gabe. Okay, so for this sprint, some big updates on the appliance side. Obviously, the biggest one is the upgrade to CentOS 7.1. So one of the big things that does is allows us to leverage features in Free IPA for external authentication going forward. There was a lot of work done by the team on this. It was a multi-sprint project. Some of the I guess the bigger things that had to be done was migrate the init and upstart scripts to systemd. And then the upstream build was completely redone. I guess the big thing with that is that the entire build environment now is virtualized. So that's going to eventually enable people in the community to actually generate their own builds. We're pretty much right there with that. There's just have to formalize the documentation, and but otherwise it's ready to go. Also, Apache was updated from version 2.2 to 2.4 as part of this work, and we switched out the core web server in the ManageIQ application from Thin to Puma. Puma is a faster, lightweight web server, more currently being maintained, and it's JRuby friendly as well. That's going to help in other areas. That's it. Yeah, next slide.
Okay, so this past sprint, we did all of the moving that we had discussed. I was actually surprised we got through the whole thing, but we did. So the first thing that we did was move the lib directory, which is a lot of standalone code, not VMDB specific code. We moved it into a directory called gems pending under the Rails application. Ultimately, things under gems pending can then be pulled out into living directly under gems once they look like standalone gems. And then eventually, those gems could be externalized into separate repos if need be. Or we can keep them right inside the repo and just create gems from that location, much like Rails does for things like active record, active support. After we did that, the build and system directories had to come out. So as Oleg mentioned early on, we have 2 new repos. Build became ManageIQ Appliance Build, and system became ManageIQ Appliance. And in doing so, the part of the whole rewrite that Greg was talking about involved making sure that those new directories, those new repos are actually part of that build process. And finally, we rerouted vmdb. So now the root of the application looks like a normal Rails app. And we got a lot of benefit. We actually had immediate benefit of that when we went to Gemnasium. We realized that one of our gems needed an update. So, that was one of the benefits of going there. Just looking like a Rails app hopefully can make things easier for contributors, because when they're learning Rails, they see it. It looks just like a Rails app. It's simple to get your hands on the code and get into it. So yeah, a lot of moving around. I'm sure there'll be issues with it. I think we have nightly builds working now. So play around with nightlies and see if you can find problems. Yeah. Next slide, please.
So I guess I'll start with this one. So one of the things that kind of fell out from last sprint with the update to Rails 4.2 was that there was some outdated serialization that we're doing in the reports. And so that's been reworked and converted over to a new format. Actually, as we speak, there's still some issues with that. There are some other types of objects that are being serialized that the migration that was done doesn't recognize. So we're actually working on that to get that straightened out. Probably should be fixed the next day or so. And we're actively working on replication as well. Jason's added some additional diagnostics so we can figure out what's going on. But we're also, I guess I should probably mention this, we're enhancing it for the next sprint so that to make it more stable and more resilient. So we're adding heartbeating down at lower level. That's one of the places where we've identified that replication is actually stopping and it's not getting restarted. So this should actually go a long way to make it more resilient.
And also it's kind of a minor change, but I'm mentioning it more for if people are actually using this, they'll need to know. The command evmdb sync manual, I renamed to evmdb sync bulk so people know what it actually does, because manual didn't mean anything to anybody. But essentially what it does is bulk transfer of the initial sync of replication using binary export and import, which is significantly faster. And that's kind of why I renamed it, because I want people to use it if it's fast. And so, yeah, it's just a rename. The last thing that we did was SOAP on the server side has been completely removed. So all of the SOAP API endpoints are gone. All the controllers are gone. Some of the client code still lives up in the gems pending verbs area. And we're actively trying to remove that out right now. But I don't believe any of those code paths are being traversed, so the code won't blow up. But the constants are still baked into the code. Unfortunately, the client side requires a lot more detangling, so it wasn't as easy to remove. So we just focused on the server side. And that's it.
Yeah, the SOAP has been removed because we moved over to the REST API. So
yeah, the REST API has full parity and has for some time now. So we deprecated SOAP on the Botvinnik release, and now we're actually removing it.
Back to Keenan.
Hi again, this is Keenan. So we pulled out, up until now, we had a custom terminal process to allow a user to log into the Appliance console, which is the menu system, to set up your initial appliance. So we pulled it out and actually gone towards just using standard Getty So the change that users will make on the left-hand side is a before, and they typed in admin to log in. Nowadays, we're just using a Linux login, which is root. So might cause a little bit of a stumble. And now they have access directly to bash. So a lot of the processes people have had to do in the past, they've needed to type in manual, just regular Linux commands. So now we're making that accessible. But we do have a nice little reminder in there to say, hey, if you want a menu, please type in Appliance Console. So going forward in the future, you no longer have to type in Appliance Console, lock console equals false, which is a big win in the Amazon use case. And that will help there. Now, I do understand that this is root, but going forward in the future, this will allow us to actually get away from the Linux root user. And this also separates the IT ops use cases from the ManageIQ superadmin. So a lot of people have wanted to, say, disable the console once this is up and running. And we've had trouble in the past when we had admin. So this will allow you to separate of configuration, because after it's up and running, you tend not to want to go in and modify the database you're pointing to. And then this allows users to log in using IDM credentials or whatever kind of Linux, if they use NIS Plus or anything. So that has now distributed login support. And then this also is allowing us to pull Appliance Console out to do a test suite, to improve our test suite. So yep. That's all I have to say about that. Anybody else?
Is the initial password for root the same as the initial password for admin, or?
Correct. Good one. So up until now, we are shipping our appliance with root smart VM, which we have been doing up until now. Continuing to do this. So the initial login will be root and smart VM.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks. Okay. So we've had as you can all see, we've had a whirlwind of changes this last sprint. I think if any engineer kind of went away and then came back, I think your whole kind of development environment has been changed from under you. Hopefully, it'll lead to easier contributions, easier way to attract new people, and easier base from which to make changes, because we're becoming much more standard as an application from all sorts of perspectives. So I'd really like to thank everyone involved for making this sweeping set of changes, because it really is that big. I think some PRs had hundreds and hundreds of files changed. So the fact that we had 181 PRs merged is probably not a good indicator. If we had number of files changed, it probably would be in the thousands. So there was quite a lot of change, quite a lot of churn. I'm hoping that it's now going to start to stabilize now that we're on a new version of CentOS, new versions of a lot of gems, and hopefully things will improve from here. So any questions out there? I see one question here about supporting Cloud Init. Are you going to support Cloud Init and allow it to set SSH key for root access? So I think we initially tried going with Cloud Init a little while ago and had some issues with it on VMware, where the boot time of the appliance took 4 minutes or something like that, and that was not acceptable. So we will have to revisit that hopefully later this summer to try to address that. Any other questions or comments out there?
So this is Greg B. I'll just add that I was one of those developers that went away and came back. I took a week off for vacation while this was going on. It was all coincidental, I swear. But when I came back and I updated everything, I was up and running in probably about 3 to 4 minutes of just kind of changing, getting rid of some stragglers and stuff. So it was actually a really clean move, at least in my experience.
Cool. Thanks.
That's it.
Yep. Anyone else? Going once, twice? All righty. Well, thank you very much for joining the sprint demo. We'll do another one in 3 weeks. And thanks to everyone for helping to make this sprint special and big. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.